I'm very interested in these sort of intra and interrelational narratives that come in and out of your office. Again, there's a form of psychotherapy, I'm sure, that only deals with the relationship with oneself. And undoubtedly, there must be a lot of good that comes from that. But you don't view it as a vacuum, right? You don't really think that it is possible to simply better one's life by bettering your relationship with yourself. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes. And I would say that the very framework of bettering your relationship with yourself is in itself a cultural narrative. That's a construct. That's exactly what happened in the last 50 years. Suddenly, this thing, bettering your relationship with yourself, feeling good about myself, becomes an organizing principle rather than feeling good about how I act towards others is my organizing principle, or feeling good about how I stand, below God is my organizing principle. So I think that there's an emphasis, right? Nobody just looks at the self and doesn't see the relationships to others, but there's an emphasis. And my emphasis is the constant dual track between the intrapersonal and the interpersonal, between what's happening inside and how what is happening inside is affecting my relationship with others. I can't think about one without thinking about the other, because I don't fundamentally believe that one can know oneself without knowing oneself in relationships to others. Now, that is a construct too. It happens to be the one that I work and think by, but that is not a truth. That just is the way that I organize relational thinking. I think of people as relational beings. And when you talk about your father, and especially when you talk about the way that you looked at these other men, to me, this is a beautiful example of how you say, this is how I felt. And I know that your feeling sits on a cultural message, that the narratives, the frames with which we interpret and give meaning and give value, that the things that are happening to us, they don't just come from us. They come from a combination of the collective manufacturing and the personal responses to it. It's always both and. Is that clear?
It actually is. And to me, one of the most, as an outsider, one of the most difficult aspects of what you do must be changing a narrative. Because when somebody comes in with a narrative, it seems almost hardwired, which is not to say they were born with it, of course, right? This gets back to what's predetermined and what is not. But when a person shows up in your office, it's often in the same way that they show up to the doctor. Very few people come to the doctor when everything is perfect to say, hey, I'm just here for some preventative care. I feel so good. I just want to make sure I feel this good in 20 years. What can you do for me?
Yes.
Similarly, I guess most people aren't showing up in your office saying, I've never felt better. My relationships are amazing. I want to keep this going. So there's a negative selection for people who walk into your life, which is, on some level, they must have a narrative that has failed, that has led them astray. Either a narrative about themselves, a narrative about others, and probably more likely a combination of these. Those narratives are probably often quite entrenched.
Yep.
So how do you go about challenging them?
So, you're right. Both modern medicine, not modern, medicine today and psychotherapy are problem-ridden contexts. They're problem-ridden narratives. If you don't have a problem, there's no reason to come to me or to you.
That's right. If you don't have a diagnosis code, I can't even charge your insurance company for you to be here.
Same here. So that is a cultural, construct, right? That is a narrative. So people come to therapy to talk about their problems. They don't go to therapy if things are fine. This is a very important piece of information, by the way, for couples therapy, because Couples therapy is in a bind. Relationship therapy, but especially couples therapy, is in a bind. Because on the one hand, so many people come way too late. Way too late. Stuff has been so entrenched. And you kind of want to say, why didn't you come 5 years ago? On the other end, if they would come when things are still okay or somewhat okay on occasion, then what's the problem that you're already going to therapy now? This is fascinating. It's like you can't go if it's good, but then when you go when it's really bad, you should have come when things were really better. Okay, so this is one thing. I think what you've just articulated is probably the core of a lot of my work. It is not the core of all psychotherapy work. I think there are different ways to enter the story. What I mean by the story is the life of people. I believe that our relationships are a story. We tell stories about our relationships. And I think that when I remember in the first episodes of Where Should We Begin, I said, when people come to me into my office, this is, I was trying to explain to the people I was producing the podcast with, what is my couple's work? And I said, people come to me with a story. At the end of the first session, the only goal of the first session is for them to leave with another story, or with a sense that there can be another story.
I was about to say, your first goal strikes me as far too ambitious for one session. I would think even casting doubt that there could be, casting doubt on that narrative and suggesting there may be an alternative one would be an amazing outcome for 2 hours.
Yeah. That's what I'm talking about. Doubt and hope.
Yeah.
So an enormous part of my work is to reframe. I think that this is an amazing piece. Why? Because it's not just an intellectual thing in my head. It's because I think that words shape the experience. The way I tell the story is going to create the way I feel about the story. And then it's going to create the way I therefore will act upon the story that I think there is. If I talk with you now, and in my mind I have this notion, he doesn't really care about me. He doesn't really value me. He's just doing this to be nice. He would have stopped this an hour ago if he could. I have no idea. I think he disagrees with everything he has said. He really doesn't think I have anything interesting to say. He's so sorry he invited me. Yeah? This instantly fills my belly. So this is not just a thought. This is not just a feeling. This is also an embodied experience. So I'm in my belly now. I have this knot, and how am I going to, what am I going to do now? And I just feel so bad about myself, and I don't know how to talk to him, and then it's going to influence how I'm going to talk next. And now I'm going to start to talk all too long and too much because I'm actually feeling unsure, and then my insecurity makes me talk more, and I'm rambling and I'm all over the place, and he's even more now thinking that I am not interesting. And this could all go into my head right now. My narrative, that one phrase becomes my experience, and my experience becomes the motor for my behavior. And the motor for my behavior is going to land me probably in a place that is often the exact opposite place of where I actually want to go. That's a narrative. Now, if I sit here and I think, Peter is really happy we're doing this. He's been waiting for this for so long. And I think he's, he had a doubt for a moment. He was wondering, should we not? And I think he's feeling good that we did it. That is going to completely change my entire experience.
Now, maybe this example isn't a great one, but does it matter which of those is reality?
But the reality is the story you tell.
That's my point, right? Is it for
it's the
your
subjective
story?
Reality.
Yeah, your story is independent of how I feel.
That's right. It's a projection. It's what I imagine. It's how I've internalized it. It's how I think my mother did or did not love me, or my dad or my brother or whoever, Yes, the interesting thing is it reality? Completely, because it's the one that is dictating my life. That's why it is reality, not because there's a factual truth to this. So the reframe is not that this is more true. What I teach my students, I say, when you reframe, the only way that you know it's a good reframe is because the other person bites on it, takes it, likes it, says, oh, I prefer to live by this view. Your father wasn't neglecting you because he was away 14 hours a week. Your father did this because he thought that this is his total devotion to his family, is to actually never be there, is the ultimate presence and devotion. Now, do we have a different feeling about your dad and about what happened to you? I'm just playing with this here, right?
Yeah, of course. I suspect there are so many patterns that you see in these narratives. And like, if you think of all of the negatively valenced emotions, right? Depression, anxiety, sadness, anger, all of the things that can not just hurt a person, but hurt their relationships. I'm curious as to what are some of the common themes that you see around those, and how you begin to chip away at the armor of a person's firmly held beliefs that are no longer serving them.
Let's go back to your word before about wordiness. What I just played out here with you are probably two of the most important narratives. The first narrative is the narrative of being unwanted. Fundamentally unwanted, not just because born not wanted, but unwanted, unloved, uncared for, undervalued, unappreciated, unseen, and something after. And I can bring this from my childhood. I can bring this from the way that I grew up. I can bring this from the way that other kids in my classroom never ever looked at me. There's loads of places where this emerged and then grew inside of me and becomes the lens through which I see myself in the world. The second narrative, where I think, I think it's okay. I think, it may not yet be where it wants it to be, but I'm not in a state of self-condemnation. I actually am looking for the appreciation. I'm looking for the acceptance. I'm looking and experiencing that acceptance, that I am worthy, that there's a reason I'm here today. There's, all of that. I think those two are probably the most fundamental of our narratives, and they are rooted in trauma and in neglect and in, either having had too much of something or too little of something, right? This is pretty much where trauma sits. To me, that's the dominant, and it will influence my anger, my sadness, my loneliness, my sense of, shall I tell him what I think or what I feel? Do people even care? Does it matter? Would they miss me if I wasn't around? My despair. All of these bigger pieces, you can see the way that they are interconnected to this fundamental, is there a reason for me to be here on this planet, for being alive? Do people think of me when I'm not there? Do I exist inside others? Do they want good for me? Versus the opposite of all of that. To me, they're not that complicated. And then the stories, thousands of stories, multitude of different stories, can be brought back to these two fundamental pieces. Similar with, do I experience a sense of agency and control over my life? Can I make changes? Or am I completely at the mercy of? I have very little power. I live with a sense of powerlessness. Nothing I will do will make a difference. Those two are directly connected to the first two, by the way.